Teaching by Jamie Gibbons. Anduin was lost. This was not an uncommon occurrence, given how often the knight found himself wandering to strange corners of the Empire, as he hunted beasts, tracked bandits, and accompanied travellers, or otherwise simply wandered. But it was inconvenient. For close to a week he'd been tracking a monster, the great brute always contriving to stay just ahead of him, no matter what tricks of the huntsman's trade he brought to bear. He wasn't even entirely sure what it was. He'd only caught small glimpses of it, since he'd scared it away from an isolated village into which it had taken to prowling. Whatever it was big, likely a few hands taller than an ox, and it was fast. Neither would present a problem to him ordinarily. Fighting such creatures was a matter of long experience for him. But he was undeniably lost, and that defied even his skills. He knew that he was somewhere in Semaholm. He'd been travelling northeast and had not yet come to the shores of the Semilak, nor had he crossed the subtle but recognisable border into Weirwater, where the composition of the great forests, which covered both territories, changed noticeably to anyone Dornish-born and bred. But those same forests, which he could read like a book on a small level to distinguish passage and activity on the ground, were confounding him. All the dark trunks and lush canopies looked the same now he was thoroughly drawn in amongst them. It was frustrating, especially since, all alone beneath the dark eaves, memories had come to the surface to taunt him. The voices of people far away, and in many cases far gone, seemed to come to him as if on the wind. One voice in particular. No, boy. If you insist on cocking your head like that while listening, I'll hand you off to a geyser's troop. You'll be of more use on a stage than out here. The admonition was accompanied by a gentle cuff to his right ear, which had been tilted upwards as he strained to hear. Lady Morvenna the Twin Wolf never truly struck him, not in a way that hurt, but she nevertheless managed to sting his heart. She was a good mentor, a wise and courageous questing knight, but she was also a strict teacher and not given to indulging foolishness. What she considered foolishness, that was the real trick to learning from her. She was a vastly experienced knight and noblewoman, and all that knowledge she was willing to impart to a dutiful and attentive pupil, if they could prove themselves worthy to be taught. "If I may, milady," he began. "My lady, boy. Speak with refinement, or do not speak." "Apologies, my lady. If I may, why must one not move one's head as they listen?" Anduin was careful to use the phrasing Morvenna had taught him. That had been one of the first lessons, and one best adhered to carefully in her presence. "Because, my young squire, moving the position of the head affects the sound. It changes it, obscures it, or else impacts the direction from which it seems to come. Clarity of the senses is vital to a knight, just as it is to a musician. If you cannot hear the subtle snap of the twig or the sigh of the wind, how will you find your way? How will you know where your foe lurks? How will you hear the words spoken softly, not intended for your ear?" Lady Morvenna shifted slightly from where she sat on a fallen log, her armour seeming to make not a sound, despite the layers of steel, green iron, and quilted cloth. That was a lesson Anduin dearly wished to learn, how to move silently while so girded, though, of course, he would have no need to know until he possessed such a harness of his own. He would be taught in time. That had been the lady's promise when she'd spoken with his parents after the griffin had attacked the village. She'd take the young Cambion on, train him as a knight, and have him inducted into House Castellan if he proved worthy. She would teach him all he needed to rise high and earn a glorious future. The tap on the back of his head was not gentle. "Are you listening?" "Yes, my lady." "I hope so, for I will not be repeating myself. Now, Listen, and tell me what you hear." The next hour had passed thus, with Anduin reporting what he could hear, and Morvenna judging. At first, his answers seemed to displease her, for all he heard was the wind and the occasional rustle of birds flitting through the boughs of the trees. But soon, faster than he'd expected, he began to hear more. The sounds of leaves rustling and boughs creaking, of small animals snuffling and rooting amongst the roots, of the wind changing in pitch and timbre as it flew through the gaps in the trees. When he sat truly still, truly silent, he could swear he heard the sound of water rushing somewhere distant. "Excellent! That is as I wished. You can hear the river running nearby? Then lead me to it, my squire. I find myself thirsty." He did so, unsurely at first, but with growing confidence. The sound of water grew to the point of true audibility, and when it did, Morvenna began to talk, absently, almost as if to herself. "That's a useful tool in a knight's arsenal, being able to listen. So few truly listen, truly take the time to hear what happens around them, especially at Anvil. Being able to listen, to think through what you hear, that's a weapon as sharp as any sword." Anduin wasn't sure if he was supposed to reply, so he put her words into practice and kept his mouth shut. When they reached the riverbank and Anduin was busy filling the water skins, Morvenna completed the lesson begun earlier. The ability to listen out for and track down fresh water is of great import. Why? Because without fresh water, one cannot survive in the wilderness, my lady. Correct, but not on the sole import of the skill. Rivers have set patterns to them, how they flow and in what direction. They begin at springs, usually in mountainous territory, and flow onward until they encounter a larger body of water, be it a lake, a waterfall pool, or a great sea. They cut through soft ground, moving about harder, higher terrain and curves, and you can learn much about a place by how it interacts with water. If you seek direction whilst wandering, do not abase yourself with the folly of hunting out true north, for the methods for doing so are so easy to confound in lands where magic abounds. Moss grows on the north side of trees. Not in a glade near a spring Regio, it doesn't. She swept her piercing amber gaze over his face, her expression not unkind, but gravely serious. When you find yourself lost, do not bemoan the matter. Listen, and the answer will come to you on the wind. Anduin met her gaze, his own azure eyes full of respect and sincerity, and bowed his head. After a moment he met her eye again, and a mischievous grin had come to his face. What does one do if magic makes the water flow backwards? Sir Morvenna the Twin Wolf, questing knight of House Castellan and Lady of Dawn, laughed. Anduin found himself smiling at the memory. He dearly missed Lady Morvenna, who had taught him all he knew in the days before he'd become a true knight-errant. Her lessons had all been so carefully laid out, worked into the fabric of their travels and giving him so many skills, from the arts of combat and knightly duty to the manners and intricacies of life and service too, and eventually among the nobility. He envied her that even now, that natural teacher's aptitude that he wished he'd possessed even a ring's worth of it. He owed everything to Morvenna, whose tutelage he had earned by foolishness, and whose approval he had strove for with every act in the days that followed. He missed her sorely, but there was no point wallowing in regret. She'd given him the tools, shown him the methods. Now all that was left was to earn the title she had given him, that final day they had stood together. The title he would not bear until he was worthy of it. He cocked his head, his right ear raised slightly to the wind, then smiled sheepishly and levelled his head again. Listen. Hear what there is to be heard. The rush of water. Left forequarter, perhaps a mile distant. You will have passed the labyrinth by now, I am sure, for we've been parted many years now. But if your soul can hear me, thank you, my lady. Thank you with all my heart. The knight errant strode onwards.